Widowed farmer catches an elderly woman, facing down a buffalo to save her chickens, but something about her catches his attention. Comment telling me what you thought of this story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and let me know what city you are watching me from. I really want to know if you like my story, and I want to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The frost had settled over Whispering Pines Valley that January morning like a silent punishment. The ground was white, hard, and the air cut the skin like crushed glass. I was already up before the sun rose, like always, like every day since Sarah passed away. 3 years now, 3 years of waking up alone, of brewing coffee for one, of talking to the silence. You get used to a lot of things in this life, but some pain never becomes a habit, it just becomes a companion. I am Luke Harrison, 52 years old, with a ranch I inherited from my father. Good land, well-kept fences, cattle grazing without a care. Nothing is missing, but nothing is extra either. Life out here is like that, half empty, half full, depending on which way you decide to look. I had chosen my side a long time ago. I had left it all behind. The sheriff's department, the city, the promises of justice that no one keeps, and returned to the country. Here, at least, the land doesn't lie. It gives or it takes, but it never deceives. I was adjusting the saddle on Rusty, my buckskin horse, when I saw it. Far off, in the middle of the frost-covered field, a small, thin figure with white hair blowing in the wind, arms wide open, standing still, and right in front of her, blowing smoke from its nostrils, a massive buffalo, almost a ton of muscle and bad temper. In the woman's hand, a thin branch. On her feet, soaked boots, and behind her back, the desperate clucking of chickens she was protecting with her own body. My heart gave a dry thump in my chest. I expected to see fear. I saw something else. I saw stubbornness. I saw someone who had already decided to die before backing down. I mounted Rusty and took off. The field was slippery. The frost made the ground betray the hooves, but the horse knew that land better than I did. The woman didn't even look back. She stayed planted there, staring the beast down as if she were the same size as it. When I got close, I yelled, clapped my hands, threw my hat on the ground. The buffalo got spooked, turned around, and went trotting heavily to the other side of the pasture. The woman lowered her arms slowly. The chickens stopped clucking, and she looked at me. She didn't say thank you. She looked suspicious. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse, tired. "Luke, I live right over there." I pointed to my house, far off, on the other side of the fence. She narrowed her eyes as if she were measuring my every word, looking for a lie where there was none. "I didn't ask for help," she said, and turned her back. I stood there, watching her walk away with the chickens under her arm, her boots sinking into the frost. There was something about that woman that I recognized, the hardness of someone who learned to survive alone. The suspicion of someone who had been betrayed too many times to believe in free kindness. It was like looking into a mirror I had avoided for years. I went back home with that image stuck in my head. The woman, the buffalo, the thin branch in her hand. During the day, I tried to focus on work. I fixed the back fence, adjusted the well pump, sorted the cattle feed. But my mind kept going back to the same place. Who was she? What was she doing alone out in that field? And why on earth had she risked her life for half a dozen chickens? The next day, I saw her again. From a distance this time. She was by the edge of a frozen creek, washing clothes in an old tin basin. The house where she lived was right on the property line of the neighboring ranch, Richard Sterling's place. Just thinking of that name made my stomach turn. Richard was the wealthiest rancher in the county. Deep voice, a smile that never reached his eyes, a way of treating folks like pawns on a chessboard. He had a gift for making cruelty look like care. He said it was for the good of everyone. That order required an iron fist, that the world was tough and only the strong deserved to survive. I knew the type. I'd seen plenty of them back when I was a deputy sheriff. And it was Richard who had gotten me pushed out of my badge. It had been 8 years. I was investigating a massive land-grabbing scheme in the region. Small farmers losing everything overnight. Documents vanishing. Threats. Folks evicted from their own homes. I was close to tightening the net. I had proof, names, dates. But Richard had connections, politicians, judges, big shots. He undermined the investigation from the inside, buried the evidence, and got me out of the way. They said I had overstepped, that I had harassed an honest man, that I had tarnished the department's image. I walked out of the precinct empty-handed and filled with rage, mad at myself, mad at the system, mad at a world where justice was a luxury item. I went back to my dad's ranch and swore I'd never get mixed up in trouble again. The land doesn't ask for justice. The land only asks for sweat. But the land had just thrown that woman in my path. I started seeing her almost every day. Always from a distance, always busy with something. Washing clothes, tending to the chickens, hauling firewood. She never asked for a hand, never looked around. She lived like the whole world was a minefield, and she had learned to step very carefully. It was on a Thursday, nearly 2 weeks after the run-in with the buffalo, that everything started to shift. I was mending a fence along the back of my property, where my land almost rubbed up against Richard's ranch. The sun was dipping low, the cold starting to bite again. That's when I heard voices, loud voices, an argument. I crept closer, staying out of sight behind the barbed wire, and I saw them. Richard was on the porch of the main house, standing tall, arms crossed, looking down like he was looking at a disobedient dog. And on the ground, on her knees, was the woman. The same one who had faced down the buffalo. Except now she wasn't standing tall. She was hunched over, small, vulnerable. "You didn't see anything, Martha." Richard's voice was calm, cold, dangerous. "Do you understand? You saw nothing." Martha didn't answer. She just stayed there, shaking. Richard walked down the steps slowly, his boots heavy on the old wood. "If anyone asks, you tell them you didn't see a thing. Because if you open your mouth, Martha, you know what happens. You know how these things end." He turned and went inside the house. Martha stayed there, frozen, until she could gather the strength to stand. When she finally moved, she was clutching something tightly against her chest, something small, folded, a piece of paper. She looked around, quick, terrified, and took off running. I stayed right there behind the fence, my heart hammering. Something was wrong, very wrong. And for the first time in years, I felt that old instinct kicking back in. The scent of a man who spent his life shielding the weak from the powerful. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my problem, that I had walked away from that life, that there was no use sticking my nose where it didn't belong. But I couldn't shake it. 2 days later, I knocked on Martha's door. She cracked it open, just enough to see who was out there. "What do you want?" she asked. "To talk," I said. "I've got nothing to talk about. I saw it," I told her straight. "I saw you with Richard." I saw the paper, all the color drained from her face. She tried to slam the door. I caught it with my hand. "I'm not the enemy. If you're in danger, I can help." Martha stared at me for a long time. Her eyes were deep, exhausted, full of stories I was never going to hear. Then she let go of the door. "Come in, but stay where I can see you." I stepped inside slowly. The house was simple, clean, poor but tidy. She turned her back to me, her hand buried in her apron pocket. I knew she had something in there, a knife maybe, or just courage. "Richard is stealing land," she blurted out. "Forging deeds, taking property from poor folks and putting it in his name. I saw him. I was washing the big living room window, and I saw the whole thing. The papers, the pen, the fake signatures, all of it. My blood ran cold. Do you have proof?" She hesitated. Then she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, folded up tight. She opened it gently, like it was something holy. It was a handwritten sheet. dates, names, dollar amounts, a simple, messy list. But it was real. "He doesn't know I have this," Martha said, her voice trembling. "But he knows I saw him, and people who see too much have a habit of disappearing around here." I looked at her, at this little, white-haired woman who had faced down a buffalo with nothing but a twig. And then it hit me. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of dying without anyone knowing the truth. I left Martha's house with the folded paper in my pocket and a heavy mind. Night had fallen fast, the way it always does during a prairie winter, and the cold whipped at my face. I climbed onto Rusty and rode back home in the dark, guided only by the memory of the trail and the sound of hooves hitting the frozen dirt. When I got back, I lit a lantern, warmed up some stale coffee, and sat out on the porch. I stayed out there late, staring out into the black, turning it all over in my head. That piece of paper was a death sentence. For Martha. For me, if I'd a death sentence. For Martha. For me, if I decided to get involved. Richard wasn't the kind of man to leave a witness breathing. And I knew that better than anybody. But I also knew that if I turned a blind eye now, I'd be carrying that weight until my dying day. I was already carrying too much. I didn't need any more. Over the next few days, I kept watch. I started riding along Richard's property line, always keeping my distance, always flying under the radar. I spotted Martha twice. She went out of her way not to look in my direction. She knew I was keeping an eye out, and she knew why. It was on a Tuesday that things started falling apart. I was down by the corral when I spotted a guy I recognized. Aaron, a hired hand who did odd jobs for Richard and some of the other local ranchers. He was standing near the fence line, staring at my house. When he saw me, he waved. I nodded back, but I didn't like it. Aaron wasn't the type to pay a neighborly visit for no reason. He sauntered over, hands shoved in his pockets, his posture a little too loose to be natural. "Hey there, Luke. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine. It's been a while since we caught up, hasn't it?" It has. He just stood there, swaying on his heels, fishing for something to say. Then he dropped it. "Heard you've been chatting with Martha." My chest tightened, but I kept my face like stone. "I chat with a lot of people, yeah, but she's kind of off her rocker, you know? Says things she shouldn't. Richard's getting worried about her." "Worried how?" Aaron shrugged. "In his own way. He looks out for the folks who work for him. But some people don't understand that kind of care. They get the wrong idea." I understood perfectly. It was a message. Richard knew I had, and he was sending a warning to back off. "I'll keep that in mind," I said flatly. Aaron smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Knew you'd see it that way. You were always a smart guy, Luke." He walked away, and I just stood there, grinding my teeth to keep the anger in. That very night, I got another visitor, Fiona, a woman in her 40s who took in laundry for Richard and a few other families in the valley. She knocked on my door late, almost 10 o'clock, clutching a bundle of dirty clothes as an excuse. "I need to talk to you," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I let her in. Fiona was good people, hardworking, honest, raising 3 kids on her own. I'd known her since she was a little girl. "What's wrong?" She sat on the edge of the chair, trembling, squeezing the laundry bundle in her lap. "It's about Martha. Richard is sending 2 of his men over there first thing tomorrow morning. I heard them talking. They're going to have a little chat with her." That's exactly what they said. A chat. My blood turned to ice. "What kind of chat?" Fiona swallowed hard. "The kind that leaves bruises or makes a person disappear for good." I shot up, knocking my chair backward. "Where is she right now?" "At her place, I think. But Luke, if you get mixed up in this, Richard will come for you too. Leave it to me." Fiona hurried out. I grabbed the lantern, saddled Rusty, and tore out into the fields. The moon was high and bright, lighting up the frost that was already starting to form again. The cold burned my lungs. The horse was running fast, but it felt agonizingly slow. When I reached Martha's place, the door was wide open. I went in, empty. The chickens were gone. Her wash basin was knocked over on the floor, and on the table a shattered coffee cup. I ran outside, yelling her name. Nothing, just the wind howling back. That's when I heard it. A low, muffled sound coming from the chicken coop out back. I sprinted over, and there she was. Martha was huddled in the corner, clutching her chickens, her eyes wide with sheer terror. When she saw me, she shrank back even further. "It's me," I said slowly, holding up my empty hands. "I'm here to get you out." "I've got nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's got eyes everywhere." "Yes, he does. So, we're going to my place. Come on." She hesitated. She looked at the chickens. She looked at me. And then, very slowly, she stood up. There was no time for anything else. I heard the roar of an engine, a pickup truck, tearing down the dirt road fast. I blew out the lantern and yanked Martha behind the coop. Headlights swept across the yard. 2 men jumped out. I didn't recognize either of them. Out-of-towners, hired muscle. They banged on the front door. Nobody answered. They walked in, walked back out, started sweeping the area. One of them had a heavy-duty flashlight. The other had his hand resting on something tucked into his waistband. I couldn't see it clearly, but I didn't need to. Martha was vibrating beside me. I put my hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Stay quiet," I urged her without making a sound. She understood. The men searched for another 10 minutes. Then they gave up. They climbed back into the truck and peeled out, kicking up a cloud of dust. I waited 5 full minutes before moving a muscle. "Let's go," I said. "Now." Martha wrangled the chickens into an old burlap sack and tied it off with twine. I hopped onto Rusty and pulled her up behind me, right onto the saddle. She grabbed my waist with an iron grip, the sack of chickens wedged between us, and we rode out into the darkness, cutting straight through the pastures, staying far away from the main road. By the time we made it to my ranch, the sky was just starting to turn gray. The frost had blanketed everything again, brilliant and white and terribly cruel in its beauty. I took Martha to the storage shed out back, a place I used to keep tools and feed. I laid out some tops and fresh straw, fired up an old camping stove, and heated up some beef stew I had left over from lunch. She ate slowly, never looking up at me. The chickens scratched around in the corner, restless. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because it's the right thing to do. Doing the right thing doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't save anybody. Sometimes it does." She stared at me for a long time. Then she shrugged off her tattered, patched-up coat and held it out to me. "You're freezing," she said. "You're colder than I am." I went up to the house and grabbed a heavy winter coat that used to belong to Sarah. It smelled like mothballs and the color was fading, but it was incredibly warm. I went back and handed it to Martha. She looked at that coat like it was spun gold. She didn't say a word, but she put it on. And in that freezing silence, with the stew going cold and settling down to sleep, we made a silent pact. She was going to trust me, and I wasn't going to let her die. Martha stayed hidden in that shed for 3 days. I brought her food twice a day, always early in the morning and late at night, when no one could spot me. Soup, bread, hot coffee. She barely ate and spoke even less. She spent her days tending to the chickens, arranging the straw, staring at the wall like someone searching for a door in a solid brick room. On the 3rd day, I was out fixing the well pump when I heard the sound of hooves crunching on the driveway. I looked up. It was Philip, a distant nephew on my dad's side, the son of a cousin who had passed away years ago. The kid was in his early 20s, looked like he'd never done a hard day's work in his life, and only ever showed up to bum money he swore he'd pay back the next week. He never did. He slid off his horse with that overly casual swagger, flashing an easy smile and holding out a hand. "Uncle Luke, been a minute, huh?" "Sure has. Just came by to see how you're doing. You know how it is, family ought to check in more often." I didn't buy a single word of it. Philip never dropped by out of the goodness of his heart. There was always an angle. "You need cash again?" I asked, cutting to the chase. He let out an awkward laugh. Nah, not this time. Just stopped by to say hi." He stood there, glancing around, a little too curious. His eyes scanned the house, the corral, and then locked onto the back shed. My chest went tight. "You doing some work on the shed?" he asked. "Just reorganizing some junk. Mind if I take a look? Maybe I can give you a hand. No need." He pushed it a bit more, but I shut the conversation down. I offered him some coffee, he took it, and he spent 20 minutes rambling about absolutely nothing. When he finally rode off, I let out a deep breath. But the knot in my stomach didn't go away. That night, I told Martha, "I think he suspects something." She turned pale. "Is he going to tell them?" "I don't know. But I'm not taking any chances." The next day, Philip came back, this time with an even flimsier excuse. Said he forgot his hat. He hadn't forgotten a damn thing. I knew it, and he knew that I knew. But I played along. I grabbed a spare hat hanging on the porch that wasn't even his, just to get him off my property. 2 days later, Richard showed up. He didn't come alone. He brought Aaron and another guy I didn't recognize. They pulled up to the front of the house, stepped out of the truck slowly, taking their sweet time. Richard tipped his hat, wiped his forehead, and smiled. "Luke, it's been a while." "Richard, mind if I come in?" "I'd rather talk out here." He shrugged, like it didn't bother him one bit. "Suit yourself. I came by because I'm worried. You know how it is? We look out for our neighbors around here. Worried about what? About you. Word going around is you've been helping out people who don't deserve it." "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard took a step closer. The smile was still there, but his eyes had turned entirely black. "Martha, where is she? I don't know. I'm nobody's babysitter. Yeah, I know you're not." But she vanished. "And I heard you were the last person to speak to her." "Who told you that?" Richard didn't answer. He just kept looking at me, sizing me up, running the math in his head. Then he turned around and signaled to his men. They started walking the perimeter of my property, poking around. My blood was boiling, but I stayed planted. "You have no right to search my land without a warrant," I said, my voice like gravel. "I'm not searching, just looking. Private property, I know. But we're neighbors, Luke. Neighbors help neighbors, right?" They snooped around for a solid 15 minutes, checked the corral, walked around the house, and strolled right past the shed. Aaron grabbed the handle and yanked. It was padlocked. He looked at Richard. Richard looked at me. "Got anything in there I ought to know about? Tools, feed, nothing you'd care about." Richard stood there for a stretch of time that felt like an eternity. Then he spun around. "All right, Luke, but if you hear anything about Martha, you let me know. I'm sick with worry. An old woman out there all by herself. She could get into a lot of trouble." They got in their truck and left. I waited until the rumble of the engine faded into the distance. Then I sprinted to the shed. Martha was huddled in the deepest corner, pale as the frost outside. The chickens were agitated, clucking nervously. "He knows," she whispered, her whole body shaking. "He knows I'm in here. He doesn't know. He suspects. There's a difference. It doesn't matter. He's coming back. And next time, he won't just be looking." She was right. I knew it in my bones. "We need help," I told her. "Real help." I stayed awake the whole night, running options through my head. At the crack of dawn, I saddled up Rusty and rode out to the next county over. It took me nearly 3 hours. When I got to town, I tracked down the office of Susan Miller, a retired lawyer who used to work alongside me back in my badge-wearing days. She owed me a favor, a massive one. Susan opened the door with a scowl already painted on her face. "Luke Harrison. I thought you were dead." "Not quite yet. What do you want?" I laid it all out. The piece of paper, Martha, Richard, the hit squad. She listened without saying a word, arms crossed, face like thunder. When I finished, she let out a long sigh. "You've stepped in a massive pile of trouble, Luke. I'm aware, And what exactly do you want me to do about it? Take it to the top. Report it. Use this piece of paper to nail him. She took the document, read it over carefully, and rubbed her temples. This is weak. Incredibly weak. Handwritten, no signature, no official stamp. Any half-decent lawyer will shred this in 2 minutes flat. But it's the truth. The truth isn't enough, Luke. You know how this game is played. I didn't say anything. She was right. I knew she was right, but I couldn't just accept it. So what do I do? Susan sat there chewing on her lip. Then she reached for the phone. I'll make a few calls. I'll take it to the state authorities. But I'm not promising a damn thing. Richard's got friends in very high places. You know that better than anyone. I rode back to the ranch with a cinder block sitting on my chest. Martha was waiting for news. I told her the truth. She didn't cry. She just nodded, like she already knew how it was going to end. 2 days later, Susan called. Richard had been hauled in for questioning. He went down, answered every question as cool as a cucumber, and walked right back out. Bail was posted in hours, high-priced lawyers, the exact same smug smile, and by the following Monday, he was back in town, strutting around like he owned the place. The rumors spread like wildfire. Aaron told anyone who would listen that I had framed an innocent man because I was jealous of his land. Olivia, the head of the local farmers board, repeated the gossip in the grocery store checkout line. Whispering Pines was a small town. Reputations take decades to build and days to destroy. I walked into my house feeling defeat, clinging to me like sweat. Martha was sitting by the door of the shed, Sarah's coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring out at the horizon. It didn't work, I told her. I know, she replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the distance. I'm sorry, you gave it a shot. That's more than most folks would do. I sat down on the dirt next to her. We sat there in absolute silence, watching the evening swallow up the frozen fields. The chickens pecked at the dirt nearby, totally unbothered. The wind was whipping up, thin and biting. So what happens now? I asked. Martha didn't say a word for a long, long time. Then she reached a hand deep into her coat pocket. She pulled something out. The paper, the exact same piece of paper I had just handed over to Susan. I stared at her, totally lost. How did you do that? I made a copy before you rode off with it, she said matter-of-factly. I've learned not to trust anybody, not even the ones trying to save me. I took the paper from her. An exact replica, same shaky handwriting, same dates, same undeniable truth. Does this change anything? I asked. I couldn't tell you, Martha said. But as long as this piece of paper exists, the truth isn't buried yet. And for the very first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The hope lasted exactly 3 days. On Thursday morning, I jolted awake to the sound of an engine rolling up my driveway. I sprang out of bed, threw on my jeans, and stepped out onto the porch. It was an unmarked SUV I'd never seen before. It parked right in front of the house. A tall guy in a crisp suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase. He didn't look like hired muscle. He looked like something else entirely. Luke Harrison, that's me. My name is Daniel Carter. I worked under you a few years back. State Police Department. It took my brain a few seconds to place him. Then it clicked. Daniel, a young investigator fresh out of the academy, fired up and ready to change the world. I had taken him under my wing right before I got pushed out. Daniel, it's been a lifetime. It has. Mind if I come inside? I waved him in, brewed a fresh pot of coffee. We sat down at the kitchen table, and he didn't waste any time. Susan called me, ran me through the whole file, the Richard Sterling situation, and I never forgot the things you taught me. You taught me that justice doesn't clock out just because the system is broken. That there's always a back door to the truth. He clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Stacks of documents. Hundreds of pages. After they pushed you out, I stuck around. I kept digging into Richard on my own time. Off the books. Kept it completely quiet. And I hit the jackpot. He spread the papers out across my kitchen table. Bank statements, shady wire transfers, massive deposits that didn't align with his declared cattle revenue. All of it obtained legally, quietly tacked onto a separate federal investigation 3 states over, completely out of reach of Richard's dirty judges. "This backs up the forgery claims," Daniel said, tapping the papers. "Between Martha's ledger and these financial trails, we've got an airtight federal case, far away from any local influence." I stared at the spreadsheets, then looked up at Daniel, and my chest seized up in a totally new way. It wasn't dread this time. It was the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, the good guys were going to win one. "What do you need from me?" "The original document. And Martha, we need her on the stand." I took a deep breath. "I'll go talk to her." Martha was out in the shed right where she always was. When I laid it all out for her, Daniel, the federal case, the actual concrete chance to tear Richard's empire to the ground, she just sat there in silence for what felt like hours. "He'll put a bullet in me before I ever see the inside of a courtroom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No, he won't. Daniel's got federal protection lined up. Susan's coordinating the whole thing. It's happening out of state, far away from Richard's reach." She looked at her chickens, down at Sarah's coat that had basically become her second skin, and around at the dirt floor she'd been sleeping on for weeks. "I'm exhausted, Luke. I'm so tired of running. I'm tired of jumping at shadows. I know you are. But if we fold now, Richard wins. He keeps doing this, and someone else is going to end up exactly where you are right now." She squeezed her eyes shut, and then she gave a single firm nod. The next morning, Daniel showed up with Susan. We all crowded around my kitchen table, going over every tiny detail, locking down the strategy. Martha handed over the ledger. Susan made certified copies. Daniel swore on his life that the case was being routed straight to the federal prosecutor. It took 2 weeks, 2 agonizing weeks of holding my breath, staring down the driveway, waiting for Richard's trucks to come roaring up. But they never came. He stayed completely quiet, eerily quiet. And then the subpoenas dropped. Richard was dragged back in. But this time there was no quick bail, no arrogant smirks, no back alley handshakes. The bank records synced up perfectly with the dates on Martha's paper. Once the dam broke, the witnesses started flooding in. People Richard had crushed, families who had lost their farms, folks who had been paralyzed by fear, but suddenly saw a sliver of daylight. The gavel came down on a Friday morning. Richard Sterling was found guilty. Decades in federal prison, complete restitution of all stolen properties, and crippling. Richard Sterling was found guilty. Decades in federal prison, complete restitution of all stolen properties, and crippling fines. His entire kingdom crumbled to dust in a matter of days. And for the first time in a decade, the air in Whispering Pines actually felt clean. But that wasn't the end of it. A week after the sentencing, Richard collapsed in his cell. Severe kidney failure, the doctor said. He was rushed to a secure hospital ward in desperate need of an emergency transplant. And the brutal irony wasn't lost on anyone. Years ago, Martha had suffered from the exact same illness. She had begged for help, begged Richard to advance her wages so she could get medical treatment while she was scrubbing his floors. He had looked her dead in the eye and said no. He told her he wasn't going to waste good money on weak stock. Now he was the one dying in a bed. When Martha heard the news, she didn't throw a party. She just stood by the window in the shed looking out at the sky. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," was all she had to say. In the weeks that followed, the valley slowly started to stitch itself back together. Martha finally moved out of my shed. She went back to her little house, sleeping soundly without locking her doors. The chickens went with her. She scrubbed the place top to bottom and planted wildflowers by the front steps. I went back to my life, fixing fences, feeding cattle, working the dirt, embracing the quiet. But something had shifted. Every morning when I stepped out onto the porch with my mug of black coffee, there was a little basket sitting by the door, fresh eggs, sometimes a batch of warm biscuits wrapped in a towel, sometimes a tiny note scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Thank you." I never once caught her dropping them off, but it made me smile every single time. One morning, about 3 weeks after the dust had settled, I was out by the corral when I spotted Martha walking up the dirt road. She was on foot, taking her time, her hands buried deep in the pockets of that heavy winter coat, Sarah's coat, the one she had never returned, and the one I was never going to ask for. "Morning, Luke." "Morning, Martha." She stood there for a second, looking a little bashful. "I came to give the coat back. You keep it. It looks better on you anyway." She smiled. It was small, but it reached all the way to her eyes. "Thank you for everything. You don't owe me any thanks. I do. You saved my life, and more than that, you folks left in this world." I stood there, totally tongue-tied, so I just nodded. She turned around to head back down the road, but halfway down the driveway she stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Luke?" "Yeah, you're not as alone out here as you think you are." And then she kept walking. I stood by the fence, watching her figure shrink into the distance. The sun was burning off the morning haze, flooding the valley with golden light. The frost was gone. The bitter winter was finally breaking. And for the first time in 3 years, since the day Sarah took her last breath, I felt something I thought had died inside me. I felt like I actually wanted to be alive. As the months rolled on, Martha and I became friends. Not the kind that practically live at each other's houses, but the kind that know they've got someone in their corner. She kept dropping off the eggs. I kept swinging by to chop firewood or patch a leaky roof when she needed it. We never talked much. We didn't have to. Whispering Pines changed too. With Richard locked away, deeds were reversed. Families moved back onto their land. Crops started growing where the soil had been dead. The town started breathing again. Philip vanished into thin air. Nobody knew where he went. Aaron came by my place, hat in hand, and apologized. He turned his life around and found an honest job driving a rig. Fiona kept washing clothes, but she smiled a whole lot more while doing it. Susan and Daniel actually teamed up. They had hands in the dirt, but now, when I looked out across the horizon, I didn't just see a massive, empty stretch of nothing. I saw tomorrow. One morning, nearly a year after that snowy day with the buffalo, I was sitting in my rocking chair when Martha strolled up the steps. She brought a thermos of hot coffee, a fresh square of cornbread, and sat down right next to me without waiting for an invitation. We sat side